Thank you, Darren. And I should say, unlike Samuel yesterday, I don't really have enough jokes in this presentation. So there's that wonderful cartoon by Polyp, where if only there was questions like that at the exam times for the CEO School of Economics, explain in your own words how limitless growth can be sustained on a planet with limited resources. Give examples and show your reasoning. And someone looking very puzzled. So I'm an environmental scientist, but I also wrote a lot in ecological economics and also ecological ethics, and I'll be talking later about eco-justice. So this talk's going to cover the need to build the new economy within ecological limits, but also with ecological ethics, and the fact that we will have to face some of the difficult issues, the drivers of overshoot, overpopulation and overconsumption. I'll be talking about Doughnut economics, which has some great stuff in it, but like other models in ecological economics, I'll be arguing that it runs the risk of being a partial solution, and then sort of talking about NENA having the chance to focus on overshoot. So we move to degrowth first and then to a steady state, long-term sustainable economy. So what's Doughnut economics? Probably a lot of you know about it. We had Kate Rower speaking at the last NENA Conference. So it seeks to ensure that every person has the resources they need to meet their human rights, while collectively they live within ecological limits. Now, sounds great, sounds good to me. So it does accept there are ecological limits, which has been a problem with neoclassical economics for the last couple hundred years, refusing to accept that there are limits. And it's also bringing in the fact there's a social foundation that we should not degrade. What I'm going to drill in is things are a little bit more complicated, because we're already in overshoot. As an environmental scientist, we've exceeded 4 planetary boundaries already, and people like Paul earlier point out, well, possibly we don't have a lot of data for the others. We may have exceeded 2 others. Functional diversity and novel entities, particularly toxification, like everyone's heard about the problems with plastics. So where society's way past ecological limits. Now again, there's a lot of people like eco-modernists, and there's a lot of them who basically refuse to accept that. So overshoot as an idea has been accepted in environmental science for at least the last 40 years. So starting with the limits to growth, various other books, etc., etc. So the idea, and in fact, of course, those of you who've read The Limits to Growth, they were viciously attacked by neoclassical economics as prophets of doom. But in fact, the models they came up with then, which are pretty simple in the 70s, in fact have been remarkably accurate in terms of what's happened since then. So the science of crisis. Well, I'm not going to read through this great book, but just to point out that there's lots of things that have been going up many-fold in the last century, and they're still going up. We've lost half our wetlands, 35% of our mangroves, and exponentially increasing with the others. So that the global ecological footprint is now 1.7 planets. We have only one. Living planet index has declined 58% since 1970. Species extinction 1,000 times above average, probably at least, because people like E.O. Wilson, who coined the term biodiversity really, would argue that it's probably 10,000 times. And he's pointing out that by the end of this century, without change, the sort of thing we're doing here, we could be losing half of the world's species. Now, of course, his mate, Peter Raven, another great expert on biodiversity, he says, no, that might not be right, it might be 2/3, which is, so we're degrading our ecosystem services, and as the book that came out some years back, Bankrupting Nature, points out, we're bankrupting nature, consuming the past, present and future of our biosphere. So again, what are the drivers of overshoot? Samuel referred to them yesterday. Environmental scientists like to talk about the entity I equals PAT, impact equals population times affluence, time technology, so we have to be looking at overpopulation, we have to be considering overconsumption, and we have to tackle the idea that growth, our economy can grow forever. So recognising overshoot, and that we are overshoot, I mean, many people think the sustainable world population is 1 to 2 billion, and people like Paul that used to say 2 billion, he now says 1 billion, largely because we've already degraded much of the world. So ecological economics started off as the idea that the economy's got to live within ecological limits. However, it's actually, or some would argue, been subverted in places over time, and many of the new models that are coming out are still growth-based. They can't kick the growth habit. Now, one of the oldest ones, 1973, is the steady state economy, came out with Herman Daly. Now, all right, I am in a body that promotes the steady state economy, but I'm there because I see it as the most comprehensive answer to tackling neoclassical economics. More recently, degrowth has had, was it 5 or might be 6 conferences now. So the steady state economy basically says, okay, you've got to have an ecologically sustainable population, you've got to have a low level of throughput of materials and energy, and you've got to distribute wealth better. But it also accepts that there is an intrinsic value of nature. So it's comparing some of these models in ecological economics, you can ask some questions. So does it focus on population? Does it focus on reducing resources? Does it focus on the problem of consumerism as a meme or ideology? Does it focus on equity? And does it consider itself as being an engine of growth or not? Now, the only one that fills all of those is the steady state economy. Degrowth, some degrowth conferences will talk about population. More recently, they haven't. Really, all the other models avoid population, or there's some discussion of it in dynamic economics, but it's then sort of not considered at the end in terms of what you do. All of them focus on equity, I'm glad to say, except it's human equity. It's not actually considering that nature deserves equity as well. And a lot of them, like circular green economy, they actually consider themselves as new engines of growth, so they couldn't keep the growth habit. Now let's look at the intrinsic value of nature side of it. Really the only one that actually talks about that is the steady state economy, mainly because Herman Daly believes in the intrinsic value of nature. He wrote a book with John Cobb, a philosopher, called For the Common Good, way back in 1994. Some degrowth people will talk about the ethics in terms of ecological ethics, but most of them don't, and basically the others don't talk about ecological ethics. Now, the interesting thing is at the moment, there's actually a process of looking for a new research agenda for ecological ethics. With Joshua Farley's leading that, there's going to be special issues of the journal Ecological Economics and Sustainability. They're going to look at a new research agenda, and I'm hoping if it gets accepted, I'll have an article in there about how ecological ethics has got to be part of the new ecological economics. So again, I'm not saying that those other models are totally bad at all. There's great stuff in all of them. What I am concerned about is the problem of partial solutions where they avoid talking about the difficult issues like population and ethics. So some of those issues is like with Doughnut, is it's not really considering the full I equals Pat equation, given that we are in overshoot. So the actual aim of Doughnut economics has already failed because we're beyond safe ecological limits. So we needed to go back to them. It makes it sound as though we still have time to play around, and we don't really. We need to go back to them. So ignoring the drivers of overshoot is not going to take us back into the safe zone. Speaking of a regenerative economy, I like the word, nice word. Sounds good, but again, how do you regenerate us back into the safe zone if you're not going to talk about the drivers that are pushing us further into overshoot? And ignoring the deep anthropocentrism in society and in academia. I'm working with a group of academics around the world challenging academia, but we're in the minority. So it's ignoring anthropocentrism is not going to lead to a fair or just future for humans and the more than human world, whatever you want to call it, nature, which is essentially our kin that live on our planet with us. So what I'm pointing out here, we're talking about the common good, and a number of speakers here have pointed out that common good has to extend to nature, but then not everyone actually foregrounds that. And I'm going to be talking next session about ecological justice and how some of us are trying to foreground that. So I'm just, I don't know, I think we're getting close to time, we're finishing off. So I would argue that the common good has to consider nature, which we are part. And way back in 1994, Daly and Cobb wrote their book For the Common Good, basically saying a sustained willingness for change depends on a love of the earth that humans once felt strongly, but has now been thinned and demeaned as the land was commodified. And that's just to say, I have various books if people want to follow up on some of those. That's me.
Thanks everyone, and hello, and thank you so much, Darren, for your lovely words earlier. Thank you, Haydn. That was a really excellent 10-minute overview of where the steady state and all these different movements and ideas are. It can be so complicated, and in a way, what I'm really excited to talk to you about is some of the work that AELA's been doing to try to synthesize all this amazing conceptual theoretical work into a really practical pathway into how local communities can engage with degrowth and understand ecological limits, but do it in a really place-based way. So I'm just going to run you through a few slides, and then because our very first sort of project work is kicking off with East Gippsland, Jeremy Schroeder couldn't be with us, but we got him recorded, and he's really excited. We're doing some work in East Gippsland early next year around the project work that we're doing. So I'll try to keep my overview, and then Jeremy's talks about 4 minutes. So together he and I are about 12 minutes, I think, or less. For those who don't know, my passion is the Australian Earth Laws Alliance and earth-centred law, governance, ethics, economics. We now say earth-centred everything, basically. What we're interested in is the inspirational work of Thomas Berry, where he critiques industrial society and its underpinning systemic structures for being deeply anthropocentric and growth-focused. So we, a bunch of us, formed AELA about 6 years ago and have been steadily building a body of work to look into all the different professions, all of our different multidisciplinary ways of working, but also work from a place of love and with deep respect for First Nations in this country. Anyone who knows me knows I work with Mary Graham, an amazing Indigenous elder and associate adjunct professor at UQ. On our board we have Aboriginal people, friends, colleagues. We engage fully and wholeheartedly, endlessly day to day with the big issues about how we build our future here in Australia, uniquely to Australia. I love my international networks, but I am passionate about the plants, the animals, the feathery, the furry, the scaly, the slimy in this place. I love this place. So to recap, Sam Alexander's work is phenomenal. I mean, you have to acknowledge Sam is quite a remarkable scholar and thinker, so please engage with his literature. So I'm really pleased to come after such great thinkers like Sam and Haydn, who've been working for years on these issues. We're already in an overshoot situation. So I'm very interested in the practical pathways to degrowth and then how we build some sort of equivalent of a steady state in this place. So if we take as the basic starting point, our beautiful planet is a great big egg, and the outer shell is both our foundation, our heart and soul, the air we breathe, the water we drink. And if we think about that, and we've already broken bits of it, and the white and the yolk are starting to hang out in a bedraggled fashion, then what we're interested in is how do we make sure that the human beings in the blue have economic activities in the red that all fit within the green. Now, as a lawyer, I've spent many, many years, including an entire PhD, analysing how our current industrial, Western, Australian, legal, economic, political, cultural, our entire system is geared towards extractivism. We have exceptions, we have alternatives, but the fundamental premise of modern Australian society is built on extractivism and growth, and we all know that, but it's just as a lawyer, I'm reminding you that the entire legal system is geared towards growth and progressing the industrial project that really began with the Industrial Revolution, but was caught up in many other webs. So for AELA, our burning question has always been, how do we create governance systems that help industrial societies think about, understand, and try to live within our limits? We already have an abundance of tools, and I want to pay deep respect to a phenomenon of work. You know, since the 50s, when people questioned plastic, through the 60s, when we had Rachel Carson, challenging chemicals, to the birth of modern environmental law in the 70s, the steady state in the 70s. The 80s is full of wonderful developments like the ecological footprint method, industrial ecology, a whole range of tools and mechanisms and calculators. In the 21st century has seen an escalation of this. Even the rights of nature is an escalation of how do we stop what we're doing and return to some kind of respect for the living world. So what we were interested in is how do we pull that together? Again, I keep saying a practical pathway because it's not a model. What we're trying to put together is a practical way for people to engage with living within limits. The nickname for this thing is green prints because while we have blueprints to document the design of buildings and projects and civil construction in our society, we literally have no master plan or process for thinking through how we do this at a practical level. So green prints is a little baby project for us, which we're really excited about, because fundamentally it's a pathway created by and for civil society. In this country, we're constantly looking to government, and I don't know if it's because of the welfare state of the late 50s or whether it's because we're a convict settlement. A lot of white fellas always saw the government as the source of all things, including rum. But either way, right now in this time, we can't look to our federal state leaders for any kind of leadership on ecological health or living within our limits. So what AELA's been doing is working with our group of amazing humans, scientists like Ian Lowe, Brendan Mackey, Indigenous leaders like Mary Graham, colleagues like Ross Williams from the Bindal Juru people who's worked for 30 years on resource management and Indigenous issues, pulling together ways of thinking about this. And the most exciting thing for me is that this approach does not start with human aspirations. So many visioning statements and different things that local councils do are always focused on what humans want and how we get there. This actually starts with an earth-centered approach. It starts with the place we live in. Just want to briefly mention Eleanor Ostrom's work is really important to us, and one of the things she talks about is the need for well-defined boundaries. Where to set limits or even to manage anything together, we have to know what that is. So, what we started to ask was, how do you set boundaries and limits so that you actually put your arms around something and go, in this place, this is the thing we can work on. This is how we can start to bring all those cool tools in. Oh, sorry, and we've focused on bioregions. I'm not going to talk a lot about it. There's a ton of science behind this, but I won't have time to go into it. But it is an amazing concept because it literally builds from geology up. Bioregions are basically defined by characteristics of the natural living world, but what even I didn't know when we started is it is literally defined from geology, the soils, the plants and ecosystems and waterways, and the ants and the animals that live there. So it's not just some random thing, it's actually built from a scientific understanding upwards. Australia has 89 bioregions. These are acknowledged by scientists across the country and around the world. There's no debate about the basic guts of this process. There are 419 subregions in this IBRIS 7 classification, and again, tons of science back there. A lot of the scientists inform us about that. They tweak around the edges, but the IBRIS 7 version has been in place for a couple of years. Now, I want to move away from science and leap back into governance. Have a think. What would the world look like if we governed in accordance with our places instead of those straight lines? Well, guess what? So just have a think about that. So when you see how Aboriginal people lived and managed 500, 600, what they now call nations, but they were all, as Mary Graham would say, autonomous communities with their own autonomous, amazing governance system. Have a look at that. So out in the Tanami Desert or out up near the Kimberley, you've got a big open patch because you have to go a little further for your resources. If you go up to the Daintree in the rainforest, much smaller country because you had a lot of resources. Now have a look at the sub-regions and the bioregions. Very similar. So this is almost a white-collar way of re-engaging with this place. It's just a start. So what I often like to say is look at all those curvy lines, and then look what the white fellas did when they turned up in 1788. I'm a descendant from English-Irish. I don't bag out my culture without, a lot of thought. But really we had 230 years of very straight lines and an extractivism culture. Now, I don't have to say much more than that. That's how that vegetation cover was in 1788, and that's what it was 2 years ago. The white stuff means it's gone. So have a think about which governance model maybe is something a bit more useful. So with my last 3 minutes, I'm just going to really whiz you through a very visual display of what Greenprints is about. So we grabbed one bioregion just to be illustrative. My graphic designer chose the Riverina bioregion, not because he knew anything about it, he just thought it was pretty. There you go. So this pathway is start with the place where you live, think about the things you love, connect with everything about it. Connect with the First Nations people, the First Peoples, if they'll have you, and if they won't, continue anyway and continue to try to work together. And there's so much within that ecocentric thinking, even getting to know your place. So many folks don't even know what river systems nearby, what the geology is. Are they highland people or lowland people? In our little workshops we run with people, it's wonderful. We play biodiversity bingo, and they have to identify which animals live here, which ones don't. It's really, really fun to get to know your place. So we look at what does health look like in this place? This place. What are all the scenarios that we could think about to make sure it's put back to health or continues to have good health? We think about the humanity within that space, how many of us there are, how we live, what we want. And we think about how we can build a new economy to retrofit ourselves into that place. The bioregional governance is the fun stuff for all my nerdy lawyer friends. I've already got 2 of them working on how you could literally easily redesign the entire Queensland planning law system to be bioregional. It's actually easier than you'd think. The cultural change is phenomenally different. But the point is, if we can create these examples and show what's possible, then you can move forward. If we keep going round and round in the theoretical conversations, which we've done for 40 years, I really worry. So, that's actually all I really wanted to say, that this to us is like citizen governance. It's like citizen science, but sexier. I tried that one and no one believes me. It's a way for people to get engaged at any level they want. They can start with their economic problems and turn them into solutions. They can start with love of place. They can also work with this cool map thing that we have, which I won't bore you with, but it's got the capacity to bring in all of the mapping systems created by scientists for scientists and be usable by citizens. I'm really excited, and I'm thankful to Marcus Foth for introducing me to the humans at QUT who are doing all that stuff for us for free. So that's it from me.